Max was the kind of dog who made every moment feel brighter. A golden retriever with soft golden fur that gleamed in the sunlight. He carried an infectious energy that made the Carters' house feel like a home. His eyes, warm and expressive, always held a glint of happiness because for Max, life was perfect. He had been with the Carters since he was a tiny pup, brought home in a cardboard box with a red bow tied around it. It had been Emily's 8th birthday, and the moment she saw him, her entire face had lit up. She had squealed with joy, lifting the wiggling puppy into her arms. "He's perfect," she had declared. "I'm going to name him Max." From that day on, Max and Emily had been inseparable. They spent long afternoons running through the backyard, playing endless games of fetch. When Emily lay on the grass staring up at the sky, Max flopped beside her, his head resting on her stomach. She would trace patterns in his fur and tell him about her day, her worries, her dreams. Max didn't understand all the words, but he understood Emily, and that was enough. John and Lisa, Emily's parents, loved Max too. John was a busy man, always caught up in work, but he had a soft spot for Max. Every evening after a long day at the office, John would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, and Max would settle at his feet, tail wagging. John would reach down, absent-mindedly, to scratch behind his ears. Lisa was the one who made sure Max was always taken care of. She was the one who gave him baths when he got too muddy from playing outside, who filled his bowl with fresh food every morning, who let him curl up beside her on the couch when the house was cold in the winter. Max loved them all, but Emily was his world. Every morning, Max woke up in Emily's room. He had his own bed in the corner, a soft, cushioned one Lisa had picked out, but more often than not, he ended up curled beside Emily under the blankets. As soon as her alarm went off, Max would stretch, yawn, and nuzzle her face with his cold nose. "Max, stop it!" Emily would giggle, pushing him away. "You're worse than the alarm clock." Max's tail wagged wildly as he followed her downstairs, his nails clicking against the wooden floor. Breakfast time was his favorite. He had his own bowl, but Emily always accidentally dropped bits of her toast or scrambled eggs for him. Lisa would shake her head, pretending to scold them. "You're going to spoil him, Emily," she'd say, but there was always a smile on her face. After breakfast, Emily left for school, and Max watched from the front window, his head resting on the sill, ears drooping slightly. He missed her while she was gone, but he kept himself busy. Lisa took him on walks through the neighborhood where he sniffed every tree and greeted every passing dog like an old friend. When Lisa ran errands, she sometimes took him along, rolling the car window down just enough for him to stick his head out and feel the wind rush through his fur. Afternoons were his favorite because that meant Emily was home. As soon as he heard the school bus pulling up, Max perked up, racing to the door. The moment she stepped inside, he leaped up, his tail wagging furiously. "Max, I'm home," she'd laugh, hugging him tightly. Then came playtime. The backyard was Max's kingdom. He and Emily would spend hours outside playing fetch, running through the sprinklers in the summer and building snow forts in the winter. If Emily was ever sad or upset, Max seemed to know. He would nuzzle her hand or lick her cheek until she laughed again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the family would settle in for the evening. Max lay beside Emily as she did her homework, his head resting on her lap. Sometimes she read stories aloud to him. "This one's about a dog who goes on an adventure," she'd say, and Max would listen intently, as if he understood every word. After dinner, the Carters gathered in the living room. On cold nights, the fireplace crackled and Max curled up beside it, soaking in the warmth. Emily sat beside him, stroking his fur, and John and Lisa relaxed on the couch, talking softly. These were the moments Max loved the most, the moments where he felt safe, loved, and certain that this was his forever home. Before bed, Emily always whispered the same thing to him. "You're my best friend, Max, forever." And Max believed her. He believed he would always be part of the Carter family, that he would always have a place beside Emily, that nothing could ever change the perfect life they had built together. He had no idea how wrong he was. The house smelled different. Max didn't. know how to explain it, but something had changed. The usual scents of home, Emily's strawberry-scented shampoo, Lisa's lavender candles, and the faint hint of John's aftershave, were still there. But now they were mixed with something unfamiliar. Cardboard, tape, and dust. There were fewer sounds of laughter, fewer moments of peace by the fireplace. The house felt empty. Max padded through the hallway, his nails clicking against the hardwood floor, sniffing at the large brown boxes that seemed to be multiplying each day. He watched as Lisa folded clothes into suitcases and John taped up boxes labeled kitchen and living room. Emily seemed different too. She wasn't playing with him as much. She spent more time in her room, scribbling in her notebook with a deep frown. When Max nudged her hand, she would scratch behind his ears absent-mindedly, but wouldn't say much. Something was happening. Max could feel it in his bones. At first, Max wasn't too worried. He had seen Lisa clean and rearrange the house before. Sometimes she put things in boxes when she was organizing, but this felt bigger. His food bowl was still in its usual spot in the kitchen, but his bed had been shoved into the corner. His favorite toys, his stuffed bear with the missing ear, the blue rubber ball Emily loved throwing for him, had disappeared. He searched the house, sniffing every box, but he couldn't find them. That's when he began to worry. Days passed, and the house became less and less familiar. The couches disappeared. The paintings on the walls were taken down. Max watched as strangers came in and out, discussing things in serious voices. One afternoon, a man with a clipboard walked through the house with Lisa, nodding as they spoke. Emily sat on the porch steps with her arms wrapped around her knees. Max trotted over and pressed his nose against her leg. She sighed and ran her fingers through his fur. "We're moving, Max," she said softly. Max's ears perked up at the word. He had heard it before. He knew what move meant. It meant car rides, excitement, and adventure. His tail wagged. Emily smiled, but it wasn't the same happy smile he was used to. It was small and sad. Max didn't understand why. The morning of the move was hectic. Max watched as the last of the boxes were carried out. Lisa walked from room to room, double-checking that nothing was left behind. John lifted suitcases into the car, his sleeves rolled up, sweat beading on his forehead. Emily was quiet. Max wagged his tail, circling near the front door, waiting for his leash. Whenever they left for long trips, Lisa always clipped his leash on and guided him into the back seat. That was how trips worked. That was how adventure started. But today, no one grabbed his leash. Max tilted his head, confused. The car doors were open. Emily climbed in, her backpack hugged against her chest. Lisa and John followed, slamming the doors shut behind them. Max waited. His tail wagged uncertainly. Lisa rolled down her window and glanced at him. "John," she started, her voice tight. "Lisa, we talked about this," John said. His tone was firm. Final. Emily pressed her forehead against the window, looking at Max with wide, watery eyes. She didn't say anything. Then the engine rumbled to life. Max's ears perked up. His tail wagged again. Finally. They were going. But then the car started moving without him. Max barked, confused. He ran to the driveway, his paws kicking up dust. The car rolled forward past the mailbox onto the road. Max's heart pounded. Something was wrong. He chased after them, his paws. Hit the pavement as he ran, his breath coming out in frantic pants. His legs stretched as far as they could go. Faster, faster, trying to keep up with the car as it picked up speed. "Wait," Max barked. "I'm coming. Don't leave me." Emily turned in her seat, pressing her hand against the glass. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. Lisa wiped at her eyes, turning away. John kept his gaze straight ahead. The car drove on. Max pushed his body harder, his lungs burning, his paws aching against the rough pavement. But no matter how fast he ran, he couldn't catch up. The car got smaller and smaller until it was gone. Max stopped running. His legs trembled beneath him, his breath ragged. He stood in the middle of the empty road, staring at the spot where the car had disappeared. He waited. Any moment now, they would come back. They had to. He sat down, tail curling around his paws. His ears twitched at every distant car sound, his head jerking up with hope. But none of them were the Carters. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows stretched. Still, Max waited. A chilly breeze ruffled his fur. His stomach grumbled. He licked his lips, glancing around. He was far from home now, farther than he had ever been without Emily. The road stretched in both directions, empty and quiet. The only sound was the rustling of the wind through the trees. Max stood up and turned back the way he came. Maybe he had misunderstood. Maybe they had meant for him to go home and wait for them there. Yes, that had to be it. He started walking, paws heavy with exhaustion. His tail was no longer wagging. It took longer to get back than he thought. His legs ached from the chase, and his mouth was dry. By the time he reached the front yard of his old house, the sun was beginning to set. He walked up to the porch and sat by the door, waiting. They would be back soon. They had to be. As night fell, Max curled up on the welcome mat, his body shivering slightly from the cool air. He kept his ears perked, listening for the familiar hum of the Carters' car. Any moment now. But the car never came. He lifted his head and let out a small whimper, pressing his nose against the door. It didn't open. Max stood up, scratching at the door with his paws. "Let me in," he barked softly. "I'm here. I'm home." Silence. Confused, he trotted around the house. He peered through the windows, his tail wagging hopefully, until he saw what was inside. Nothing. The house was empty. No furniture, no toys, no fireplace, no Emily. Max's tail lowered. His ears flattened against his head. The Carters were gone, really gone, and they hadn't taken him with them. Max didn't leave the porch that night. He curled up on the mat, ears twitching at every little sound. By morning, hunger gnawed at his stomach. He stood up and stretched, shaking the dirt from his fur. Maybe they were just late. Maybe if he waited longer, they would come back. So he waited and waited. The second night was colder. By the third day, Max's stomach growled constantly, but he refused to leave the porch. The fourth day brought rain, and he huddled under the awning, shivering as water dripped around him. On the fifth day, the neighbors noticed him. An old man walked by and clicked his tongue. "Poor thing," he muttered, tossing Max a piece of bread. Max ate it hungrily but stayed put. The sixth day passed. Then the seventh. No one came. Max's heart hurt in a way he didn't understand. His family had never left him before. He didn't know what he had done wrong. He didn't know why they hadn't come back. But as the days stretched on, a terrible realization settled deep into his bones. They weren't coming back. They had abandoned him, and Max was all alone. The days stretched long and empty. Max didn't understand time the way humans did, but he understood the shift of light and dark, the way the world felt colder when the sun was gone and lonelier when the moon replaced it. He had waited on the porch for what felt like forever, his ears perked at every passing car, his tail twitching with the hope that one of them would stop, that they would come back. But they never did. Max was still waiting when his stomach's ache became unbearable. It had been days since he had last eaten a full meal, maybe longer. He had licked up the crumbs left on the porch, sniffed at the empty bowls inside the house through the windows, but there was nothing left for him. The Carters were gone. And now, Max had to figure out what to do next. Max stepped off the porch for the first time since they left. His legs felt shaky beneath him, stiff from lying in the same spot for too long. He sniffed the air, searching for something familiar, something that might lead him to food. The neighborhood was still the same, but it felt different now. Before, Max had always walked these streets with Lisa or Emily, his leash snug around his neck, his paws light with the excitement of a stroll. Now he walked alone, every sound making his ears twitch, every unfamiliar scent making his fur bristle. His first stop was the trash cans at the edge of a driveway. He had never searched through them before. Lisa always kept him away from them, but now he was desperate. He pawed at a black plastic bag, ripping it open. The scent was overwhelming. Rotting food, plastic, sour milk. But underneath it all, there was something edible, a half-eaten sandwich. Max grabbed it between his teeth and swallowed it down quickly, barely taking the time to chew. It wasn't enough to ease the hunger, but it was something. He moved on to the next house, then the next. Some trash bins were empty. Others had nothing but scraps, but Max took whatever he could find. By the time he reached the end of the block, his stomach still ached, but at least he wasn't as dizzy. Even though he had started scavenging, Max always returned to the old house by nightfall. He curled up on the porch, ears pricked at the sound of approaching cars, his tail thumping weakly. Whenever headlights appeared in the distance, maybe tomorrow, he thought, maybe tomorrow they'll come back. But tomorrow came, and no one returned. The rain came instead. It started with a drizzle, light droplets that dampened Max's fur as he rested on the porch. He barely noticed at first, too tired to move. But then the drizzle turned into heavy sheets of rain, cold and relentless. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Max flinched at the deep growling sound. He tried curling up under the awning, pressing himself as close to the house as possible, but the wind carried the rain in every direction. Within minutes, he was soaked. His fur clung to his body, heavy and cold. He shivered violently, his tail tucked tightly against him. For the first time since they had left, Max whimpered. He had never been out in a storm alone. When he lived with the Carters, storms had meant warm blankets and gentle hands rubbing his fur dry. Emily used to build little forts with pillows and let Max crawl inside with her. She would giggle as he nosed his way under the covers, whispering, "Don't worry, Max, it's just noise." Now there was no warm blanket, no Emily. Just rain, cold pavement, and an empty house that no longer smelled like home. The storm didn't stop the next day. Water pooled in the streets, turning the dirt patches into mud. Max's fur was matted and caked with grime. His body ached from sleeping on the hard ground, and his hunger had returned in full force. He couldn't stay here anymore. For the first time, Max left the house without looking back. He wandered farther than before, moving through streets he had never explored. The familiar houses of his neighborhood faded behind him, replaced by louder roads, bigger buildings, and strangers who barely glanced at him as he passed. The deeper he walked into town, the more dangerous it became. At one point, Max found a bag of leftover fries outside a restaurant. He had barely sunk his teeth into one when a scrappy black dog, ribs jutting out under thin fur, lunged at him with a growl. Max backed away, ears pinned, as the other dog snarled and bared its teeth. The dog wasn't playing. He was starving, just like Max. Max whined softly and turned away, leaving the food behind. He didn't want to fight. As the hours passed, Max dodged bigger dangers. A speeding car nearly clipped him when he stepped too close to the road. A group of teenagers threw rocks at him when he got too near a fast food parking lot. The world outside his home was nothing like the one he had known. By the time the sun started setting, Max was exhausted, his body weighed down by hunger and cold. Then he saw him, the old man. The man sat on a bench near a small grocery store, dressed in a thick coat that looked worn but warm. His hair was white, his face lined with deep wrinkles. He had a small paper bag beside him, from which he pulled out bits of bread and ate slowly. Max hesitated, his stomach twisting. The man must have sensed him because he turned his head, his sharp eyes locking onto Max's shivering form. "Hungry boy?" the man asked, his voice rough but not unkind. Max's tail gave a weak wag. The old man reached into his bag and tore off a piece of bread. He held it out, waiting. Max crept forward, cautiously, his body tense. The man didn't move. With one final glance to make sure it wasn't a trick, Max took the bread from his hand and swallowed it in one gulp. "Poor thing," the man murmured. He tore off another piece and dropped it onto the ground. Max ate. That too. For the first time in days, his stomach didn't ache as badly. The man didn't try to pet him, didn't try to leash him. He simply sat, eating his own meal while sharing small bits with Max. When the bag was empty, the man sighed and stood up. "Wish I had more for you," he said. "Take care of yourself, boy." Max watched as the man walked away, disappearing down the street. For a long time, Max stayed near that bench, wondering if the man would come back. He didn't. But even after he left, Max felt something different. Not quite hope, but not completely lost either. Despite everything, Max found his way back to the old house by nightfall. He climbed the porch steps, his paws dragging with exhaustion. The house was still empty, the porch was still cold, and yet he curled up there anyway. Because even though he knew deep down the Carters weren't coming back, some part of him still clung to the belief that maybe, just maybe, they would. Maybe tomorrow they would come home. But as the days stretched on, and the food grew scarcer and his body grew weaker, that small spark of hope began to flicker. And Max began to wonder if he had been forgotten forever. Max had waited. Days had turned into weeks. The hunger, the cold, the loneliness. He had endured it all because he had believed they would come back. Every morning he woke with his head resting on the wooden porch, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion, but ears always tuned to the road. He had never given up hope, but hope was a cruel thing. That evening, the sky was painted in streaks of orange and pink, the last warmth of the sun fading into the night. Max lay curled up on the porch, his body frail and weak. He had stopped scavenging as much. His limbs felt heavier, and his stomach had grown used to the constant ache of hunger. Then, he heard it, a sound that made his ears perk and his heart leap. A car, not just any car, their car. Max shot up, his tail wagging furiously, his legs unsteady but filled with sudden energy. His nose twitched, catching the unmistakable scent of John's cologne, Lisa's perfume, and Emily's familiar warmth. They finally came back. With a joyful bark, Max leapt off the porch and ran toward the driveway, his tail a golden blur behind him. His heart pounded with excitement as the car rolled to a stop. Any second now, Emily would call his name. Any second now, the door would open, and he would feel her arms around him, smell the sweetness of her shampoo as she buried her face into his fur. He could already imagine it, the reunion, the joy, the relief of knowing he had never truly been forgotten. But then the door opened, and everything changed. A puppy bounded out of the car, small, golden and full of life. The young Labrador yipped happily as he tumbled onto the pavement, his tail wagging like a flag. Max skidded to a stop, confusion replacing his excitement. He looked from the puppy to the car, waiting for the moment they would realize their mistake. But then he heard it, the sound of laughter. John chuckled as he scooped up the puppy, ruffling its floppy ears. "Look at him go," Lisa smiled warmly. "He's adorable. I think he's going to love it here." Emily giggled, reaching out to scratch the puppy behind the ears. "You're such a good boy, buddy," she cooed. "You're going to love your new home." Max's breath caught in his throat. His tail stopped wagging. They weren't looking at him. They weren't calling his name. They were calling someone else's. "Buddy." Max took a hesitant step forward, his eyes pleading, his body trembling with desperate hope. He let out a small whimper, his voice weak from weeks of hunger and exhaustion. Emily glanced up. For a brief second, her eyes met his. And then, guilt. Her hand faltered as it stroked Buddy's fur. Her lips parted slightly as if she might say something. Max's heart pounded. She remembered. She still cared. But before she could speak, Lisa's voice broke the moment. "Come on, let's take him inside." Emily hesitated, just for a second. Then, she nodded and turned away. Max watched as they carried Buddy up the porch steps, the same steps he had been sleeping on for weeks. They opened the door he had scratched at, cried at, waited by, the door they had never opened for him. Then they stepped inside, and the door shut, leaving Max outside, alone. Max stood there for what felt like forever. His legs ached, his ribs pressed against his skin, visible beneath his matted fur. His once bright golden coat was dull, tangled, and covered in dirt. His paws were cracked and sore from weeks of walking the streets. But none of that hurt as much as this. He had waited. He had been loyal, and they had replaced him. A lump formed in his throat as he stared at the closed door. His ears drooped, his tail hung limp behind him. For so long he had clung to the belief that they would come back for him, that they still loved him, that he was still their dog. But the truth was undeniable now. They hadn't forgotten about him. They had chosen to leave him, and they had chosen to love someone else instead. Max didn't know how long he stood there. The light inside the house glowed warmly against the darkening sky, shadows moving behind the curtains. He could hear the faint sound of laughter, the squeaking of a new toy, the scuffle of paws against the floor. Buddy was already settling in, and Max no longer belonged. His legs trembled as he turned away, one slow step at a time. His head hung low, his body heavy with exhaustion, grief, and a pain he didn't have words for. He didn't look back, because there was nothing left for him to see. For the first time, Max knew he wasn't going home, because he no longer had one. And now, he had nowhere to go. Max walked. One slow step at a time, paws dragging against the cold pavement, his head low, ears flattened. The house, the place he had once called home, grew smaller behind him, its glowing windows and the sounds of laughter fading into the night. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't stay. He lingered at the edge of the property, hidden behind the thick bushes near the fence. He could still see inside the house through the window. The Carters sat together in the living room, smiles on their faces. Buddy lay curled up in Emily's lap, his small golden body nestled against her the way Max used to be. Max swallowed hard. That was supposed to be him. His ears twitched as he watched Lisa scratch Buddy behind the ears, whispering to him like she used to whisper to Max when he was just a puppy. John leaned back on the couch, relaxed, content. Emily laughed as Buddy licked her face, her giggles filling the room. They had moved on. So easily. Max's heart pounded painfully in his chest. He didn't understand. How could they forget him? How could they replace him? Hadn't he been good? Enough? Hadn't he done everything they had asked? Hadn't they loved him? Tears welled in his eyes, but he blinked them away. They weren't coming back for him. Not now. Not ever. Max turned and disappeared into the night. He walked aimlessly, the once familiar streets of his neighborhood stretching out before him, now foreign and empty. His paws ached, cracked from weeks of cold pavement and rough terrain. His ribs pressed against his thinning fur, his once glossy coat now dull and tangled. The hunger gnawed at him, but it wasn't just his stomach that hurt. It was his heart. He wandered past houses where families sat together at dinner tables, the warm glow of lamps casting soft light through the windows. The smell of food drifted through the air. Roast chicken, baked bread, warm soup. But none of it was for him. Once he had a place at a table, too. He passed the park where he and Emily had spent countless afternoons playing fetch. The grass was damp from the evening air. The swing set creaked gently in the breeze, but the laughter was gone. Emily wasn't here anymore. She wasn't calling his name. She was at home, with Buddy. Max lowered his head and kept walking. As he moved farther from the neighborhood, the world changed. The quiet streets of his old home turned into busy intersections, where cars rushed past without a second glance at the stray dog limping along the sidewalk. The air smelled different here, like exhaust, metal, and old garbage. The towering buildings loomed over him, blocking out the sky. Everything was loud. People walked past him, their shoes clicking against the pavement, their voices blending into an overwhelming hum of noise. Some glanced at him with pity, but none stopped. They didn't see him. Not really. He was just another stray, Just another forgotten thing. Max had learned to scavenge, but tonight the hunger was worse than before. He sniffed along the sidewalk, searching for anything edible. He found a half-eaten sandwich near a trash can and gulped it down in 2 bites. It wasn't enough. He wandered into an alley, where the air smelled of damp cardboard and something rotten. Rats scurried past him, disappearing into dark corners. His legs trembled beneath him, weak from exhaustion. A few other strays were there, dogs like him, thin and desperate. One of them, a scruffy brown mutt with torn ears, growled as Max got too close to a pile of discarded food scraps. Max lowered his head, backing away. He had no energy to fight. Instead, he moved deeper into the alley, his body growing heavier with every step. The exhaustion hit him all at once. His legs buckled beneath him, and he sank onto the cold concrete. His breath came in slow, shallow pants, his body too weak to move anymore. He had nothing left. No home, no food, no family. He was alone. And for the first time since the Carters had left him, he realized he might not survive. The thought should have scared him, but instead, he felt numb. Maybe it would be easier this way. Maybe it was better to stop waiting. His eyes fluttered shut, the weight of sleep pulling him under. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard footsteps approaching, a shadow moving toward him. But Max didn't care anymore. He was too tired, too broken. And as the darkness swallowed him, for the first time in his life, he stopped hoping. Max lay in the alley, his body curled in on itself, his breathing shallow. The night pressed in, around him, cold and indifferent. His once golden fur was matted with dirt, his ribs protruding sharply beneath his thin skin. He had lost track of time, of how long he had been lying there, of how long he had been wandering, of how long it had been since he had felt warmth, love, or safety. And for the first time in his life, he didn't care if he ever woke up again. But then, something nudged him. A rough, calloused nose pressed against his side, firm but not aggressive. Then a voice, deep, gravelly, but not unkind. "Hey, pup, you dead?" Max didn't move. The nose prodded him again, a little more forcefully. "Come on now, don't go quitting on me. Ain't no dignity in dying in a place like this." Slowly, reluctantly, Max forced his eyes open. The world was blurry at first, the dim glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the alley. Then he saw the figure standing over him, a large, wiry dog with patches of gray in his black fur, his face lined with scars. His eyes, sharp and knowing, studied Max with something that almost resembled amusement. "Figured you weren't gone yet," the old dog muttered, sitting back on his haunches. "Would have smelled it if you were." Max stared at him, too weak to respond. The old dog sighed, shaking his head. "You're in bad shape, kid. But lucky for you, I don't like watching young ones die on my turf." He gestured with his nose. "Come on, you need food. Food." The word stirred something in Max, a dull hunger that had been buried beneath exhaustion. But he didn't move, didn't trust, didn't care. The old dog huffed. "Look, I ain't got time to convince you. You want to lay here and rot, that's your choice, but I'm offering you a way to keep going. Take it or leave it." Max blinked sluggishly. Something about the old dog's voice, gruff but certain, cut through the haze in his mind. He didn't want to die, not really. So with every ounce of strength he had left, Max pushed himself onto shaking legs. His paws wobbled beneath him, but the old dog didn't let him fall. "That's the spirit," the old dog grunted. "Come on, stick close." Then he turned and padded deeper into the alley. Max followed. The old dog, who introduced himself as Joe, led Max through the tangled streets of the city, weaving through alleys, crossing roads only when it was safe and moving with an ease that spoke of experience. Max tried to keep up, but his body was still weak, his stomach aching. Joe noticed. "You're slower than a 3-legged cat," he muttered, but his tone wasn't unkind. Max didn't answer. He hadn't spoken since the Carters left. He wasn't sure if he even knew how to anymore. Joe took him to a small, forgotten corner of the city, hidden behind a row of dumpsters. "Ain't much," he said, "but it's home." There were old cardboard boxes stacked together, a ragged blanket, draped over a wooden crate. A small pile of scraps, mostly bread and bones, sat beside the crate. Joe nudged a piece of bread toward Max. "Eat." Max hesitated. Joe sighed. "Listen, kid, I don't know where you came from, but out here, you don't turn down food, you don't waste nothing. That's rule number 1. Max's stomach twisted, the hunger too strong to ignore. Slowly, he bent down and ate. It was stale, dry, and tasted like dust, but it was the best thing he had eaten in days. Joe watched him, nodding approvingly. "Good. Now, rule number 2. You gotta know where to find food. See, folks ain't all bad. Some leave scraps, some throw out good stuff. You just gotta know where to look." Over the next few days, Joe showed Max the ropes. They rummaged behind restaurants, slipping into alleyways where the scent of food was strongest. Joe taught him how to spot the places where kind-hearted humans left out leftovers, how to tell which garbage bins had the freshest scraps, and how to move quickly before other strays or raccoons got there first. "You gotta be fast," Joe warned one evening, after a fight nearly broke out between them and a group of desperate, snarling strays. "Out here, if you ain't fast, you ain't eatin'." Max learned fast. He learned how to dodge the city's dangers, how to stay away from angry shopkeepers who chased them with brooms, how to cross streets without getting hit by cars, and how to keep his head down when bigger, meaner dogs were nearby. He learned how to survive. Days turned into weeks. Max's ribs were still visible, but his steps grew steadier. His fur was still dirty, but he was no longer so weak that he collapsed after walking a few blocks. Joe, for all his roughness, never abandoned him. "You got fight in you, kid," he said one night as they lay curled up behind an old abandoned truck. "Thought you were a goner, but you're tougher than you look." Max didn't know if that was true. Sometimes when the city was quiet, when the stars peeked through the cracks between buildings, he still thought about the house, about Emily, about Buddy. He wondered if she ever thought about him. Joe seemed to notice the faraway look in Max's eyes. "Still thinking about him?" he asked one evening. Max stiffened. He didn't answer. Joe let out a heavy sigh. "I seen it before. Dogs who had homes, families, then one day they don't." His gaze turned distant. "Hurts like hell. Ain't no way around that." Max lowered his head. "But listen," Joe continued, his voice quieter now. "You keep living, you hear me? You don't just lay down and give up. You survive. You learn to live for yourself." Max didn't respond. Joe didn't push him to. But something about those words settled deep inside Max, like a seed planted in frozen ground, waiting for spring. One night, as Max and Joe scoured behind a restaurant for scraps, they heard a yelp, sharp and terrified. Max's ears perked up. Joe tensed. "Stay put," Joe ordered, his voice firm. "Ain't our business." But Max had already moved. He followed the sound, slipping through a gap in the fence, and saw a small, shivering pup, no older than a few months, cornered by 2 snarling dogs. The pup's whimpers cut through Max like a blade. Without thinking, he growled, a deep warning sound that surprised even him. The larger dogs turned, baring their teeth, but Max stood firm. He wasn't strong, wasn't big, but he was desperate, and desperation could be powerful. He lunged, not to fight, but to startle. It worked. The larger dogs hesitated just long enough for the pup to scramble away. Joe appeared beside him. "Damn fool," he muttered, but there was something almost approving in his voice. They led the pup to safety. And that night, for the first time since the Carters abandoned him, Max felt something other than loss. He had saved someone. He had mattered. Maybe, just maybe, Joe was right. Maybe he could keep going. Maybe he could survive. The city was restless that night. A storm was brewing. Max could feel it in the air, the way the wind carried a strange tension, how the streets smelled different, heavier. He glanced at the sky, where thick clouds rolled over the distant buildings, swallowing the stars. Beside him, Joe huffed, shaking out his ragged fur. "Storm's coming," he muttered, ears twitching. "We need to find cover." Max nodded. They had spent enough nights in the open to know how bad the weather could get. The rain wasn't just wet, it was cold, relentless, and dangerous. If you didn't find shelter fast, the city turned crueler than it already was. They moved through the streets quickly, their paws barely making a sound against the pavement. Max had learned to move like Joe, low, quiet, invisible. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, Max wasn't just thinking about himself. The first raindrop hit Max's nose as they reached an abandoned building near the edge of town. It was an old auto shop long since shut down, its windows shattered, the garage door rusted and barely hanging on its hinges. Joe had taken him here once before. It wasn't perfect, but it was dry. "Come on," Joe grumbled, slipping inside through a gap in the door. Max started to follow, then stopped. Somewhere beyond the sound of the wind and the distant rumble of thunder, he heard something else. A sound that didn't belong to the city. A sound that made his ears perk, his heartbeat quicken. Crying. Not an animal, not a dog, a child. Max turned toward the sound, his body already moving before his mind could catch up. "Max!" Joe barked after him. "Where the hell are you going?" Max didn't answer. He sprinted down the street, his paws splashing through puddles, the rain coming down harder now. His fur was quickly soaked, the chill cutting deep into his thin frame, but he didn't slow down. Then he saw it, a small figure near the intersection, barely visible in the dim light of a flickering street lamp. A little boy. He couldn't have been older than 5, his tiny arms wrapped around himself as he shivered, tears streaming down his face. He wore a thin jacket completely unfit for the cold, and worst of all, he was standing dangerously close to the street, where cars sped past without a second thought. One wrong step, and he'd be gone. Max didn't hesitate. He barked, a sharp, urgent sound that cut through the storm. The child flinched, startled, and turned wide, frightened eyes toward Max. Max barked again, stepping closer, his tail raised but not wagging. He wanted to look strong, protective, not threatening. The child sniffled, stumbling back slightly, away from the road. Good. Max took another step forward, lowering his head, his eyes never leaving the boy's face. He could smell the fear on him, the scent of rain and tears mixed together. A car zoomed past, its tires splashing water onto the pavement. Max growled, not at the boy, but at the street, at the danger. The child whimpered, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "D-doggy?" he mumbled, voice trembling. Max's tail gave the smallest wag. "Yes, I'm here." Then he heard another sound. Footsteps. Joe. The old dog had followed him despite his grumbling. He stopped a few feet away, shaking his head, muttering under his breath. "Damn fool dog, always running into trouble." But there was no real anger in his voice. Max turned back to the child. The boy was still crying, his small body trembling from the cold. He needed help. But Max wasn't human. He couldn't speak. He needed someone who could. So he did the only thing he could think of. He barked, louder this time, sharper, a sound of urgency, of desperation. Help him. Someone help him. Joe, realizing what Max was doing, joined in. 2 strays, standing guard over a lost child in the middle of a storm, barking as loud as they could, hoping, praying that someone would hear. And then, miraculously, someone did. A car, slowing down. Max's ears flicked as the sound of tires skidding against wet pavement filled the air. A door slammed, then fast footsteps approached. A woman rushing toward them. She was young, with dark hair plastered to her face from the rain, her coat wrapped tightly around her body. Her eyes, filled with concern, locked onto the child first, then flicked to Max and Joe. "Oh my God," she breathed, dropping to her knees beside the little boy. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" The child sniffled but nodded, his tiny fingers clinging to her sleeve. Cold, he whimpered. The woman's face softened. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, wrapping her coat around him. "Let's get you warm." Then, slowly she looked at Max. Her gaze was different from the way most humans looked at strays. There was no disgust, no fear, no annoyance. There was gratitude. "You found him, didn't you?" she whispered. Max didn't move, didn't even breathe. Then, hesitantly, he wagged his tail. The woman smiled. "Good boy." She carried the child back to her car, wrapping him in a warm blanket. She spoke into a small device, a phone Max recognized from his time with the Carters, telling someone that she had found a lost child and was taking him to safety. Then she turned back to Max and Joe. The rain still poured. The wind still howled. Joe stood stiffly beside Max, his expression unreadable. The woman looked at them for a long time. Then, without a word, she crouched down and held out her hand, an invitation. Joe snorted. "Ain't my place," he muttered, already turning away. "Go on, kid. You earned this one." Max hesitated. For so long, he had been nothing but a stray, a ghost in the city, invisible, unwanted. But here now, someone had seen him, not as a burden, not as a problem, as a hero. The woman's hand was still outstretched, waiting. Max took a deep breath and stepped forward. As the woman guided him into the warmth of her car, Max curled up beside the rescued child, feeling a strange sensation he hadn't felt in so long. Hope. He didn't know where this new path would lead, but for the first time since he had been abandoned, since he had watched the Carters drive away, he felt something deep inside him shift. Maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over yet. Max lay curled up in the corner of the car, his wet fur clinging to his frail body. He could feel the warmth of the heater, the soft vibrations of the engine beneath him. The scent of the child still lingered in the air, salt from his dried tears, the faint hint of peanut butter on his small hands. And beside him, the woman. She had saved the boy. She had saved him. But Max didn't trust it. Not yet. The last time he had ridden in a car, he had been abandoned. He had watched his family drive away without him, leaving him in the middle of nowhere like he was nothing, like he had never mattered. And now, here he was again, inside another car with another human. Would this one leave him too? The car eventually slowed, pulling into a driveway. Max lifted his head slightly, his body tensed. He could smell the house before he saw it. A mix of lavender, freshly baked bread, and something. Warm, familiar home, but not his home. The woman, Emma, stepped out first, gently scooping up the little boy. She spoke into her phone again, telling someone that the child was safe and that help was on the way. Then she turned back to Max. "Come on, boy," she said softly. "Let's get you inside." Max didn't move. He didn't trust doorways anymore. Last time, he had walked up to a door, waiting, begging, only to have it shut in his face. Emma must have noticed his hesitation because she knelt down beside him, her brown eyes filled with something he didn't recognize. "Patience. You don't have to come in right now," she said. "But if you do, there's food and a warm bed, and I promise you won't be left out in the cold again." Max's ears flicked. Promises. Humans made them so easily. But still, his stomach growled. Emma smiled. "That's what I thought." She didn't try to drag him inside. She simply stood, walked up the porch steps, and left the door slightly open. An invitation. Max hesitated, staring at the open space. His legs trembled with exhaustion, but he forced himself to stand. One step, then another. He crossed the threshold, and Emma closed the door, gently, not locking him out, but keeping him in. The house was small but warm. Max stood stiffly in the entryway, unsure of what to do. Emma moved around the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she grabbed a bowl and filled it with something that made Max's nose twitch. Food. Real food, not scraps, not trash. She placed the bowl on the floor. "Go ahead," she encouraged. Max's legs carried him forward before his mind could catch up. He sniffed first. Chicken, rice, carrots, something Emily's mom used to make for him when his stomach was upset. His heart clenched, but hunger won. He ate quickly, too quickly, his body desperate for nourishment. Emma sat nearby watching. "You must have been on your own for a long time," she murmured. "Poor thing." Max didn't look up. He just ate. Because if he stopped, if he let himself think, the pain might creep back in. Over the next few days, Max learned the routines of the house. Emma had a soft voice, a calm presence. She didn't push. She didn't yell. She fed him in the mornings and let him rest in a corner of the living room where a blanket had been laid out just for him. But Max never let himself get too comfortable. He refused to sleep near the door, too afraid that one morning he'd wake up and find himself tossed back into the cold. He flinched whenever Emma picked up her keys, his body stiffening as she walked toward the front door. Would she come back, or would this be the time she left? Him for good? She always returned, always greeted him with a smile, but Max didn't wag his tail. He didn't trust it. Not yet. Emma never forced him to love her. She let him come to her on his own terms. At night, she sat on the couch reading or watching TV, occasionally glancing his way but never calling him over. She simply waited. One evening, as the rain pattered softly against the windows, Max watched her from across the room. The house was quiet, warm. His blanket was soft. His stomach was full. He should have felt safe. But safety had been an illusion before. He had let himself believe in love once, and it had broken him. Emma must have sensed his struggle because she spoke without looking at him. "You don't have to. Stay forever," she said. "I just want you to know you're welcome here." Max's ears flicked. An open-ended promise. No expectations, just kindness. That night, he crept a little closer. Not all the way, but closer. Days turned into weeks. Max started to heal. His ribs weren't as sharp. His fur wasn't as matted. His steps weren't as heavy. Emma introduced him to the backyard, a small space with grass, a few flowers, and a worn wooden fence. She left the door open, letting him decide whether to step outside. The first few times, he refused. But one day he did. And when he looked back, the door was still open. She wasn't locking him out. She was letting him choose. Something inside him shifted. Maybe this place was safe. Maybe Emma meant what she said. Maybe he could believe again. The first time Max wagged his tail, it was small, barely noticeable. But Emma saw it, and she didn't make a big deal out of it. She just smiled. The first time Max let her touch him, it was hesitant, a brush of her fingers against his back as he passed. The first time he fell asleep near her, he startled awake expecting to be somewhere else, somewhere cold. But he wasn't. He was still here, still warm, still wanted. Max would never forget the past. He would never forget the way it had felt to be left behind. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to live in the past anymore. Maybe love wasn't just something that ended. Maybe it was something that could be found again. As he curled up by the fireplace one evening, Emma glanced down at him, reaching out slowly, giving him time to move away. He didn't. Her fingers brushed through his fur, soft, gentle, real. Max sighed, his body relaxing fully for the first time in what felt like forever. He didn't know what the future held. But for now, in this moment, he was home, and, for the first time since the Carters had driven away, he believed in forever again. Max was learning what it meant to be wanted again. The ache in his ribs was fading, both the physical and the invisible kind. His once matted fur had grown thick and golden again, no longer dulled by dirt and neglect. The hollowness in his stomach had disappeared, replaced by the steady rhythm of warm meals and full bowls. But the wounds in his heart were harder to heal. Each day with Emma felt safer, more real, but some part of him still braced for the moment when it would all disappear, when the warmth would turn to cold, when the door would shut behind him for the last time. Because that was how love worked, wasn't it? It never lasted. Still, something had begun to shift. It wasn't just in the way his body had grown stronger, the way his tail had started wagging just a little when Emma spoke to him. It was in the way she looked at him, like he belonged, like he mattered. And for the first time in a long time, Max wondered, what if this wasn't temporary? What if he had finally found home again? It started with a car ride. Max still didn't like them, not after what had happened the last time he had trusted a car to take him somewhere safe. But Emma never forced him. She always let him hop in on his own, always left the door open so he wouldn't feel trapped. And when she reached out to buckle his harness, she did it slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted to. He never did. She drove them through the city, past the alleyways and sidewalks that had once been his entire world. Max stared out the window, his reflection staring back at him. He looked different now. No longer the starving, broken thing he had been when Joe found him. No longer just a stray. They pulled up to a small brick building, its windows bright with pictures of dogs and cats. A vet's office. Max's ears flicked in uncertainty. Emma scratched behind them, smiling. "Don't worry, buddy. We're not here for anything scary." She was right. No sharp needles, no strange humans poking at him, no cold metal tables. Instead, a woman at the front desk beamed at him. "So this is Max," she said warmly. Max stiffened. How did she know his name? Emma laughed. "It's official," she said, handing over a folder. "I'm his owner now." Owner. The word didn't sink in right away. Emma knelt beside him, running a hand gently over his fur. "You're my dog now, Max." Her voice was quiet, steady. "Forever. Forever." Max stared at her, his heart hammering. Forever was a long time. Forever was supposed to mean something permanent. But forever had ended before, hadn't it? He had thought he would be with the Carters forever. He had believed Emily's whispered promises when she hugged him at night. But the Carters had left him. They had replaced him, hadn't they? Emma didn't look like she would leave. But how could he trust that? How could he trust her? Then she did something that made everything stop. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small metal tag, and clipped it onto his collar. It jingled softly as it fell against his chest. Max glanced down, ears twitching as it caught the light. His name was on it. Not just any name. His name. Max. It wasn't the Carters' phone number on the back. It wasn't their address. It was Emma's. Something inside him cracked. Something he had been holding on to for so long. The belief that love would always be temporary, that home could be taken away. It crumbled. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't borrowed love. This wasn't a promise that would be broken. This was real. And maybe, just maybe, it was forever. That night, Max curled up in his usual spot near the couch. The fireplace flickered, casting golden light across the room. The house smelled like Emma. Lavender, vanilla, and something warm he still couldn't quite place. Home. Emma sat on the floor beside him, running her fingers through his fur. She didn't talk much, she never needed to. She just let him be. Max watched the flames, the warmth sinking into his bones. Then, before he even realized he was doing it, his tail wagged, not hesitantly, not because he was forcing it, but because he wanted to. Emma noticed immediately. She didn't gasp, didn't cheer, didn't make a big deal out of it. She just smiled and whispered, "There's my good boy." And this time, Max believed her. The days turned into weeks, and Max changed in ways he hadn't thought possible. He no longer flinched when Emma grabbed her keys, because he knew she would always come back. He no longer slept curled up in the corner, waiting for the day he would be kicked out, because he knew this was his home. He no longer felt like a stray, like a forgotten thing wandering the world without a place to belong, because he belonged here, with Emma, with the woman who had seen him when no one else had, with the woman who had chosen to love him not out of convenience, not out of obligation, but because she wanted him, and that was the difference. The Carters had loved him once, but when life got hard, they had chosen themselves. Emma had chosen him, and that was what family was supposed to be. One afternoon, as Max lay on the porch, watching the world go by, Emma sat beside him. She sipped her coffee, glancing down at him with a thoughtful look. "You know," she said, "I don't think I should call you a stray anymore." Max flicked an ear. She smiled, scratching under his chin. "You're not lost, Max." She kissed the top of his head, her voice soft but sure. "You're home." Max leaned into her touch and wagged his tail, because for the first time in a long time, he believed it. And he knew he was finally where he was meant to be. The seasons had changed. The cold, relentless winds of winter had given way to the first hints of spring, filling the air with warmth and the scent of blooming flowers. Max no longer flinched at the sound of rain or curled up expecting the cold to creep into his bones, because now he had a home, a real home, with Emma. Life had settled into a rhythm. Morning walks through the park, warm meals waiting for him, lazy afternoons spent napping by the fireplace while Emma read. The fear of abandonment had faded, replaced by the quiet certainty that this love was real, that it wouldn't be taken away. For the first time in a long time, Max wasn't just surviving, he was living. And he was happy. One afternoon, Emma clipped on his leash for their usual walk, leading him through town, past the familiar sense of bakeries and coffee shops, past children running through the park. The leash was loose in her hand, not because she had to hold on to him, but because she chose to. Because Max no longer needed a leash to know where he belonged. Then, as they turned a corner, a familiar scent hit him. It was so faint at first, he almost didn't notice. But when it registered, his paws slowed, his ears twitched, his heartbeat quickened. He knew this place. Even after all this time, after all the changes, he would never forget this smell. The Carters. Emma noticed him hesitate. "What is it, bud?" she asked gently. Max didn't move, didn't answer, because at that moment his eyes locked onto something ahead. Emily. She was in the front yard of a house, their new house. It looked different from the old one, bigger with a neatly trimmed lawn and a swing set in the yard. She was sitting on the grass, laughing as she tossed a ball, and chasing it, full of energy and joy, was Buddy. Max stopped completely, his body still, his breath caught somewhere between memory and reality. Buddy, the dog that had replaced him, the dog that had taken his place in Emily's life. For a long moment, Max just watched. Emily still looked the same. A little taller maybe, but her smile was still as bright as it had been back then. She laughed as Buddy tumbled over himself trying to catch the ball, her hands reaching out to ruffle his ears, the same way she used to do with Max. Something inside him twisted, but not in the way he had expected. Months ago, this sight would have crushed him. It would have sent him spiraling into the memories of being left behind, of waiting on that cold porch, of watching the door close with no intention of ever opening for him again. But now, he felt nothing, but understanding Emily had loved him. But she was just a child. She hadn't made the decision to abandon him. That had been her parents. And though she had moved on, he could see it, the guilt still lingering in her eyes, the way she occasionally glanced toward the road, as if looking for something or someone. Maybe in her own way, she still missed him. Maybe, late at night, she still thought about him. But the difference now was Max didn't need her to, because he had Emma, and he was happy, truly, deeply happy. For the first time, he realized that what the Carters had done to him no longer defined him. They had abandoned him, But he had survived anyway. They had left him behind, but he had found something better. He wasn't lost anymore. He wasn't their dog anymore. He was Emma's. Max exhaled, a slow, steady breath. Then he did something he never thought he would do. He turned away. Not out of pain, not out of anger, but because the past no longer had power over him, because the future was waiting. Emma, sensing the moment, knelt beside him, running her fingers through his fur. "You okay?" she asked softly. Max looked up at her, at the woman who had saved him, who had given him a second chance, not just at life, but at love. He licked her hand and wagged his tail. She smiled, rubbing his ears the way she knew he liked. "Come on, bud. Let's go home." Home. The word felt real now. True. Not just a place. Not just a promise. But his. Max took one last glance at the house that had once been his whole world. Then he walked away, without hesitation, without regret, because he had already found what he had been searching for, and it was waiting for him right beside him where it had always been.